So there are two of us, two anthropologists this afternoon, and I will do what anthropologists usually do, also with my colleague Kathleen Lowrey, and she's provided a very big picture. And now I'm going to the case study. So this is one of the usual ways we proceed when we do some research and want to learn some things. Oh, I don't want you to watch that first. So this is my presentation. I'm going to try to reflect with you. This is an ongoing reflection, and that's why I titled this "Notes on the Bigger Picture" with a case study from Spain. We'll go back to these logos afterwards in the end of my presentation. Okay. So before I start presenting the case study within the bigger picture that Kathleen provided, I think that we need to ask ourselves two questions and to be sure what kind of question are we asking, and also adopt the starting point. We're looking at things from a certain beginning. Where did this all began, and where to which point back in history should we move to in order to understand what kind of present we have, but also to adopt the standpoint. So from where I'm looking at what I'm going to talk about. And I want to make this clear beforehand. So out of the two possible questions, how the penetration of transgenderism and gender identity ideology has been made possible, in fact, now and here, in general, or in a specific country, in a social context like Spain, or a second question, what is the agenda and where is it coming from? I think that Kathleen provided a lot of key issues to reflect upon about the second question. So I'm going to talk about a specific country's social context, like Spain, to try to explain why has it been so successful, so quick, this embracing of gender identity ideology and its penetration in the political agenda. And the key word will be catching up. So also the starting point is I put it in I located in the 30s with 3 stages, and don't worry, I'm not going to be comprehensive in from the 30s in the 20th century to nowadays, but I think we need to go back and see what happened to understand this quick embracement and unproblematic embracement of this ideology in this particular context. And then also the standpoint is that we could look at leading figures when we provide an overview and we reflect upon decades of history and try to explain why we are the way we are today. But and we can also look at the people's history. So I will try to keep both, because I think this is also key in understanding why is it so difficult to try to counterfight what is being widespread among the left and among the working people, among what used to be a very strong working class movement, also against dictatorship. So, and it also has a bottom line. We're talking about inequality all the time and a conceptual framework and language, instead of talking about what's happening to the position of women and talking about women, focusing about women, we should talk about male supremacy. So I may not have time to reach that, but that's also behind my rationale, okay? So let's go to the 30s, the Second Republic that some of you may remember. You may have seen that in your secondary school syllabus. The Second Republic was proclaimed in Spain in April 1931. And it was a very progressive move, because we came from dictatorships and corrupt monarchs, everything. So the king was expelled and the republic was proclaimed. And things went and moved really, really, really fast. So in October 1931, the women's suffrage was approved, not without controversy, because they thought that women in Spain, most of them illiterate, even those who belong to middle classes, were not really or doing what the Catholic priest would do. So the progressive people who were struggling to pass the women's suffrage bill had to face all the opposition, specifically Clara Campoamor, who was the leading figure of the time, had to oppose left-wing MPs, saying that it would be a disaster, it would lead us to a complete right-wing republic. Well, it was approved finally, Also in 1932, the first divorce law was approved. My grandmother benefited from that. On 25th June 1935, the abolition of prostitution, a very light law was passed, but because there was no agreement at all, but it was very progressive for the time. On Christmas Day of 1936, so after some months that had already started the Civil War, abortion within the first 2 weeks was approved. We had an anarchist woman as the Minister of Health at the time. And there were these campaigns promoting what was called co-education, that just simply meant putting boys and girls together in the classrooms, not real co-education as we understand it today. And there were lots of campaigns against illiteracy in general, not only against illiteracy among women. There are lots of millions of people were illiterate at the time in Spain, especially among the peasantry. As you know, in July 36, we had the Spanish Civil War started as a result of a coup by the fascist army, led by Franco and other generals. What happened after that? So you see, in only 6 years, less than 6 years, because the war ended in 1939, what happened? Lots of things. It was really progressive. And as I would like to say that the narrative of Spanish Civil War is in commas because I adhere to another historiographic narrative that says that the Spanish Civil War, in fact, should be regarded as part of the Second World War, because all the international forces and sides that then disputed and were confronted in the Second World War tested all their power in Spain, and in fact, the sides were exactly the same afterwards. So this is why it is written this way, and it makes all the sense. So in very few years, lots of things happens in favor of women's rights and the women's position in society. Then we had exactly the opposite. For a very long period, almost 40 years, we had this fascist dictatorship, and all political and civil rights were suppressed with all kinds of repression and torture. Prior divorces were left without effect. All women's rights were suppressed. The Catholic Church was present and impregnated every single article in the civil law and in education. Republican teachers, former Republican teachers, were even imprisoned or forbidden to work. And until that happened until 1975, you know that story. But to confront women, all women's rights that in other countries were being fought for in later decades, had already been achieved by the Spanish Republic in the 30s, in the mid 30s. In 1977, we also talk about the recovery of democracy, not that we achieved democracy as if we had lived, I don't know, in some kind of obscure times since the Middle Ages. We recovered democracy. And what happened? That's the starting point. What happened? Remember, this is only 6 years of incredible success and almost 40 years of defeat. What happened? You can see this in pictures too. You can see the Liberatorios de Prostitución, where some anarchist women were trying to teach their male partners not to consume prostitution. They were liberating women, trying to give them alternatives. You see the countryside women dressed in traditional dresses voting for the first time, women in factories, women in administrative works, Clara Campoamor, the leading figure, how girls and young women celebrated the proclamation of the Republic and joined the army. And then you see on the other side of the picture of your screen what the dictatorship looked like in very many senses. So that's also just to have this impression. 6 years and almost 40 years. Okay, so in the pictures at the bottom of your screen on the right hand side of it, you can see again demonstrations at the end of the dictatorship and during the transition to democracy, where women were present in all the fights and all the struggles, both for workers' rights and for women's rights as well. So. And then we come to another period, a completely different period that leads us to where we are. It's a very long period. It's 40 years again, almost 40 years, 20 until the 2000s, and then from the 2000s to nowadays, another 20 years. I call it the recovering and expanding rights and freedoms, but there's a parallel move from collective struggle to individual choice. And I know, while I know this has happened in many other countries, because the 80s was a bad time for everyone, where the neoliberal agenda started to develop intensively. In Spain, it was a time for celebration. So we got back rights for all, among them, of course, women's rights, the struggle for equal rights, divorce, economic rights, reproductive rights, abortion, with, of course, all the tensions and all the political struggles between the conservatives, already still very influenced by the Catholic Church, but we got it through. We have an abortion law that all these rights are very fragile. And in fact, one of our colleagues in Feminist Question Catalonia has just published a book that is called that way, Fragile Rights. And she tells the history of a generation of women, while she lets us know how she was living through all these periods since the late 50s until nowadays. And it is really interesting to see how fragile all our rights are. And I'm going to provide an example in the end of this presentation. So the parity regulations, the quotas to promote women opportunities in all areas, equality, unities, and agents in all kinds of areas, in universities, in schools, in the institutions, everywhere, following international recommendations, laws, that's very important, the law against gender-based violence, and also the state agreement that provided more an expansive budget to that, and acknowledged other types of violence that had not been included in the first law. Also, we were the fourth country in the world to pass the bill on same-sex marriage in 2004, and the first Gender Recognition Act that, of course, makes it dependent on medical, psychological, and legal procedures before getting the gender recognition reassigned, sex reassigned in the official documents. All this happened very quickly at the beginning of the 80s, and at the beginning from let's say the second half of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. So again, everything was very fast. At the same time, what was happening? People were really explosive, trying to catch up with modernity, anything that came from abroad and anything that could label us as modern, and not those coming from the backwards society of the dictatorship. So this enjoying instead of transforming everything that we receive. So some people may have heard about the Movida Madrileña. I think that there was an explosion of leisure, creativity, but also individualism, and trying to show your individual genius and creation, and everything was welcome, and that entailed many other cultural behaviors of our time, in fact. So catching up very quickly with what was going on everywhere, and even going further. Okay, so we're also, we became full members of the European Union, first from the European market and then from the European Union, and we could witness a period of economic growth, also a deep change in the productive system from producing from the factory work, from manufacture to what is called now the knowledge economy. We should also question that, we're critical with that label. Also increased consumption, but at the same time, we could witness a time where people became really politically disengaged because they relied in institutions to do their work. In fact, we could say that institutions were doing their work, and a wide part of the feminism, a large part of feminism became institutional. That's true. And we relied on that too. And in fact, there were proof that it was working. We were advancing as a society in women's rights, etc. At the same time, we could witness the rise of regional nationalist parties. That was the kind of political participation that attracted the most people. And then we came to 2008 and the impact of the economic crisis. And as you know, Madrid, Barcelona, but especially Madrid and other Spanish cities, together with other cities in many other countries in the world, witnessed this movement that was called in English Democracy Now, and it's the indignant movement in Spain that gave way to what is known as the New Left. Okay, in 2019, and since 2018, we've had this, well, first the Social Democrats in power, and from 2020, a left-wing coalition, but back in power. So everything to celebrate, everything to celebrate. You can see one of the pictures of the indignant citizen movement, the anti-austerity policies from the European Union, applied also by the national country governments, etc. What has happened? So you see on your left and up on your left, on the top of the screen, one of the demonstrations, that the one in 2018, that was massive, and it also involved a strike, the first women's strike in Spain, while white demonstrations were taking place in other countries in the world. In Spain, it also included a strike, and it was really successful. It had to do with a terrible rape, a group rape of a girl in one of the feasts of San Fermines, you know, in Navarra. And it was terrible. And it also triggered the demonstration of women from all ages. And it really let us see, or it let us think that the feminist movement was really fashionable, let's say, was being reorganized and was being live, etc. Okay, but then you can see the rest of the pictures. Okay, and the rest of the pictures, you see the picture of some women in black and white sitting there, and the women in the forefront of the picture, where there are 4 women. This is a meeting of the Spanish Feminist Party, and that woman there, who is the same, who's much younger in the picture in black and white, and then a little older, a recent picture in the lower picture. She's Lidia Falcón. Lidia Falcón is an advocate. She is a lawyer, an advocate for women's rights. She was very active during the dictatorship. She organized all kinds of services for women who, of course, divorce was not legal, but she struggled to get them the best results in their separation movements. And she's also a playwright. She's done all kinds of things. She writes in the press, etc. And she is, in fact, the leader of the Feminist Party. The Feminist Party was part of this coalition of left-wing parties that's called the United Left, as you can see in the bottom on the left, at the bottom of the left, on the left, and the Secretary General there, who's currently the Minister for Consumption in Spain. And the Feminist Party was expelled, and especially it was expelled because of the positions, the public positions that Lidia Falcón, its leader, had expressed concerning transgenderism. And she talked about one intervention of an 8-year-old trans girl in the parliament in one of the autonomous regions, saying that she needed the rights to be herself. And she said, well, she can't have the age of knowing what she wants and how she will develop. And this is, of course, and she provided to the public media her opinion, feminist opinion of what transgenderism is. All the usual. And you can see, of course, this kind of the signs below the black and white picture, where the way she is portrayed. But this is not enough. And she has been reported, and the prosecutor's office, you see there, the official document, the prosecutor's office has charged her with, has accepted the report, the claim from a trans activist person who's the leader of a movement. And she is facing trial. She's facing trial because the claim has been accepted. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see how the current minister that came from those squares there, the anti-indignant movement, from which we expected much more, celebrated the Pride in Madrid. And of course, you can see it's flooded with the trans activist colors and images, etc. And you can see also a demonstration of the trans platform there. So you see what's happened. You see what's happened. So we have a new coalition on the left. We thought that we were about to see an expansion of rights. And what we see is that the leading figure who had been tortured under Franco of the Feminist Party is being reported and is going to face trial in the next months for expressing her feminist views on transgenderism. But it's not only from the front door that we're seeing what's happening here. This penetration of transgender ideology in politics, but also from the back doors. You can see here the official document of a law that is currently in Parliament, is being discussed in Parliament in Catalonia, my autonomous community, capital city Barcelona, that apparently, as it says here, sorry, I should have translated that, now I realize, it's a proposal, it's a bill to modify the current male against female violence. There's no word in English for violencia machista. It's not only gender-based from male to female, machista, that's what it means. Violence, that it was one of the most progressive laws that was passed in 2008. In the short period, we had a left-wing government in our regional parliament. And from the left wing, called more left-wing party in the parliament, they say it is necessary to update this law because it needs to cover more forms of gender-based violence that were not included in the law in 2008 to increase the protection of victims. But on page 2, you see who the victims are. Now the victims are going to be redefined, and the victims, this law is going to protect the rights of women, girls and adolescents, transgender and cisgender, intersexual persons, as well as non-binary identities. So we stop talking about people, it's just identities, non-binary identities, or those who don't want to relate with any specter of binary gender, which means we're talking about people first, cis and trans, then we're talking about intersexual persons, then we're talking about identities, and then we're talking about those who we don't have a clue who they are, who don't want to identify with anything related to a binary gender. So through the presentation of an improvement of rights and the protection of women against violence, of which only women are the targets, they introduce a redefinition of the victim. Okay, and this is the back door. I call it the back door. This is now being discussed, and it's of course raising very few or known public debate because it is not public. It's not made public because the press is not interested, and because it seems as an improvement, it's an expansion of rights. So even when we're discussing the improvement of the law to protect women and girls from violence, of which they are the targets, in fact, the back door is used to introduce transgenderism. Of course, on the right, you have the announcement of the trans bill that nobody has seen the text of it, but we have a deadline until November 18 to say what we think about kind of a summary that the minister has made public for all. So you see the back door and the front door. And what happens? It happens that everyone is embracing that as the expansion of rights. Again, it is very difficult everywhere, but it is even more difficult in a country that has seen these short periods of intensive improvement in women's rights, expansion of rights for all, with this idea of trying to catch up and enjoy instead of trying to catch up, understand what's going on in the world at large and transform it or struggle to transform it. And it is, as I said, even more difficult, but we had signs of that. So we've been moving in history kind of the other way around. As I said, during the 30s, it was very progressive and very intense. During the 80s, instead of witnessing the penetration of neoliberal policies, we were just thinking of how we were recovering the rights. So we were in a kind of another way in comparison to other countries in the world. And now we are in the same path, we're facing the same problems, but we're less prepared, even less prepared, I would say. We have seen signs of that in the academia since the 80s. And as an anthropologist, and I hope my colleague, and I'm sure my colleague will agree, my colleague in Canada will agree, that we've seen how postmodernism has penetrated in social sciences in general, but in feminist research, but especially in social anthropology, because the three features of postmodernism that are the critique of authority, where really this first one was really welcome within anthropology, and it led to the crisis of representation. Who are we to represent the other, and all these dynamics that you may be familiar with. The second feature is the fragmentation of issues. So we, in anthropology, we gave up, or the academia gave up, generalization, which is one of the two key issues that we can provide to humanity, as you will have seen from my colleague's presentation. That includes a misunderstanding of intersectionality. By the way, I should say that intersectionality is mentioned in one of the laws, of the three laws that the Minister of Equality wants to get passed, and it is used in this idea of accounting privileges and oppressions. So a trans woman will always be more oppressed than a woman, etc. Okay, so this misunderstanding or misuse of intersectionality that is so logical, because you need to take into account the specific positions which are contextual when we try to understand the inequalities experienced by people in general, women in particular. It's used as something individual, a kind of individual account in which you can sum or deduce. Intersubjectivity, of course, rather than materialistic analysis of life conditions. It has penetrated. The third characteristic of postmodernism has also penetrated the social sciences in general, and anthropology in particular, to the extent that our business, as Ulf Hannertz, a Swedish anthropologist, labeled our business, the anthropologist business, diversity is being transformed. It is no longer the way we defined it, but from a program for understanding human cultures and societies to an untouchable given of individual subjects. So no one can say what is diversity, only every subject can. And then we gave up explanation to making voices visible and nothing else from those voices. And you can just review, if you want, the titles of the communications and the papers that are presented in conferences, and we have stopped talking about social relations, and everybody's talking about bodies as the focus. Bodies in motion, bodies here and bodies there, just to make it fast and short. So in fact, we lack intellectual tools to face the new moves from the back doors, especially because we don't see them coming. We haven't seen them coming. And it has a political impact, as I say, because while everyone, even in the academia, was really concerned about the expansion of the economic neoliberal agenda, we were not paying attention, rather being the victims of the expansion of the cultural side of the neoliberal agenda, which creates a state of opinion favorable to all this fragmentation, intersubjectivity, and critique of any authority. We see that with COVID now. Everyone has an opinion, and all the opinions are valid, so that they flood the networks and the social networks with false ideas, so that people can choose what to believe. In Spain, as I said, embracing every expansion of rights is the norm, and leaving behind every discrimination, because although it is a widespread situation and state of thought in many societies and cultures and countries, it has its roots, specific roots in Spain. And I think we should understand the specific roots of every country. So the rest, we all know about it. It's desires as rights, while bodies for sale and individual identity as a commodity, including the consumption of our own bodies. And this is a way not to think collectively at all. It's our bodies that we need to work on. And in the meanwhile, as I explained on August 22nd in this Feminist Question Time seminar, regional parliaments in 14 of our 17 autonomous communities in Spain have passed trans laws in education that are, of course, already having an impact that we're at least recording. The key word, of course, is resistance. And in the meanwhile, new radical feminist organizations, platforms, and coalitions have been organized. And now we come back to the three logos you can see. The first one is Feministas de Catalunya, feminists from Catalonia, the organization I'm part of in our region. And the second one is Confluencia. Confluencia, you can understand, it's the confluence coming together of MF, means Movimiento Feminista, the feminist movement, which is an umbrella that was presented publicly last Tuesday and includes more than 40 organizations of women throughout Spain, and that has presented, of course, allegations to the law that we haven't read, but at least to the intents of it and the summary of it that the ministry has made public. And Feministas de Catalunya, we have produced also our documents saying that we disagree with this modification of the law in Catalonia to protect women and girls from violence. And the last one is a modest initiative, but it's growing very fastly, also of women teachers and professors, also throughout Spain, Feminist for Co-Education. So the DO goes for teachers or professors teaching in the teaching profession, Feminist for Co-Education. And we have also written our principles, and we are trying to alert families and teachers of what's going on and the consequences of what these regulations that have been passed will have or are having, and to provide an alternative thought. And we're, of course, drawing on the excellent work that has been done by Safe Schools Alliance in the UK and other organizations. The first one, and very important one, is how can women around the world support Lydia Falcón and what she's facing and what she's going through. And I think this is really important, but it's very easy. I provided all these, the profile, the picture addresses, so you can write to us, but it's you can find her very easily, Lydia Falcón, but don't make the mistake to write the first I. It's an I, it's not a Y. So it's Lydia, okay? It's with two I's, not with a Y and an I. And it's very easy, and we can help, and we're part of the Women's Human Rights Campaign, and we can provide all kind of information, and everything that's going on. It's going to be really big and together, and we have to show the Spanish authorities that this simply can't happen to anyone, but the least to Lydia Falcón, who represented us all during the dictatorship. The second thing is that someone asked me whether I had been censored, and I was happy that I wasn't. But it's not true. I have already been censored, and it makes all the sense that I share it with you, because I've been censored. The two articles that came out from my presentation on August 22nd here, where I explained the penetration of transgenderism in schools. So it's taken me quite long, and only a communist newspaper, online digital paper, published my first paper, and next Monday the second one is going to be out. But those who had published me all kind of papers before said it was very complicated. The paper didn't have a position because, you know, it's very polarized. You are quarreling the feminist among yourselves and all this kind of narrative. So it is interesting. I already have the experience. I don't have your horrible experience, Kathleen, at university, fortunately, but something's happening already. And the third thing is that someone was asking, what's going on in Spain? There are 3 bills that have been tried to be discussed and passed by the current Ministry of Equality. And it's not 1, but 3. And the trans one, we don't know about the text, but it's just a consultation, a public consultation without the text. So it's 3. please write to us and we will be very, very happy to provide in English all kind of information so you can support us and then we can support you in return anytime. Thank you.